I'd like you to hear the interview. Hopefully it's a verbal picture and you can get an idea. The first one is Terry Sheehan, and he'll describe his garden for you. So have a listen for the background sounds. Unfortunately, there was, of course, at one stage, not only the cicadas, but the neighbour blowing some things. But hopefully you can hear and get a sense of what Terry's done in his amazing garden at Wentworth Falls. Garden when you first arrived, and this little paradise was a mess. Is that right, when you arrived?
Certainly wasn't much at all. Plan in progress.
So you had, at the front here, I'm just in the front of the garden, a normal sized block.
It is a normal sized block, about probably half an acre or something.
No, quarter of an acre. Yeah.
Oh, quarter, yeah. Quarter
these days, I think, a little bit less than quarter of an acre. But here at the front yard, you've got three big trees that shade the front garden. Were they here when you came?
They were here, and they've grown since we've been here and had to be pruned back a bit. Otherwise, we're completely shaded, so
yes,
it provides protection.
So it's very nice north-facing front garden, but north-facing is the north-facing sun is gobbled up by these massive trees.
Yeah, but it's good in a way that provides the shelter, especially on days like this in summer, so I can grow shady things out in the front garden.
Yeah, so that's what you've got here. You've got a beautiful curved path to the front door and a balcony with some lovely pot plants on them. What are the plants that you've got here in the front garden? So this is very much an ornamental garden, isn't it?
It's an ornamental, they call it exotic garden. I've got a few natives. I've got a waratah up the front, but at the moment we've got annuals in that should be nice for Christmas as violas and petunias, and I've just planted some tuberous begonias in some large pots that I bought this year, and they'll be lovely early next year.
Okay, so will you keep them in the begonias in the pot all year, or will you put other things in that pot?
They'll have other things. In May we plant tulips, hundreds and hundreds of tulips in those pots, and then I like to have two rotation displays a year, so
okay,
sometimes manage a bit more than that.
So do you take the begonias out?
Take them out and store them under the stairs, and they pop up and I just transplant them through.
Right. And then behind that is sort of, you've got a layered effect here in the garden. So you've got the violas at the front, and then behind that, what's this bush here? So you've got a higher bush, looks like a flowering cherry or something.
Yes, that's a weeping snow fountains cherry, and in spring that's absolutely covered in white blossom. And in the front of it there is a pyrrhus, which it's like strings of pearls, so it's a whole avalanche, like a big,
how beautiful,
like a big iceberg.
Yes, so I see the little strings of pearls are coming out. They're green at the moment, and are they about say half a metre long when they're all out?
A little bit less than that, but they'll be out in spring. So they're the actual remnants. So they're the seed pod sort of thing.
Right, and then behind that you've got a whole bank of azaleas going up to the tree. So what colours azaleas do you have here?
Absolutely every colour imaginable, and it provides a beautiful backdrop for the tulips in spring, because we get the tulips in the foreground, and then the azaleas are like a coloured cloud in the background.
Right. Okay. And you open this garden in spring?
I have had garden clubs through, and I have people coming through. I don't have huge amounts of people.
Right, so anyone who belongs to the local garden clubs could contact you and bring the group around?
Yeah, Blue Mountains Garden Club on Facebook, they've been through.
And there's Wentworth Falls Garden Club, that's a very active club.
Yes,
just around down do you go to that?
I don't actually, no.
Oh, you should, it's a nice group of people.
I'll have to look it up.
Yeah.
I'm going to show you too, this maple here, I had in a pot in Sydney as a seedling, and I always promised it that it would one day come up to the mountain. So that's the very first plant that I ever planted up here.
Oh, okay.
And now that would be well over 40 years old. So
yeah, that's a beautiful maple. So it's about 2 metres tall,
Yeah.
and sitting behind a lovely rose. Is this fragrant rose?
Not that one.
No, not that one. And so that looks as if it's very happy here.
It is. It's what they call Astor dissectum palmatum. It's a Japanese maple, and it's grafted. And we've got a border here of Daphne. So when that has no leaves on it, the Daphne takes over, and it's just very fragrant.
Right. Oh, I love Daphne. This is obviously the right spot for Daphne because they're quite hard to grow. And so they obviously need... Well, I was about to say, I obviously need shade, but I've got Daphne that's very, very happy in my garden, and it's in the north-facing hot part of the garden.
Amazing, isn't it?
So up here in the mountains, they seem to survive. In Sydney, I had a lot of trouble growing a Daphne.
Yes.
I love the Daphne for the fragrance.
Yeah, I saw that as an idea. Like when you go on walks around different gardens, I always get ideas. And I remember years ago seeing a rose garden that had Daphne around it, and I've got the white Daphne and the pink Daphne. So
Right, so maybe they're companions.
yes.
And before we go further, just for people listening, so we're in this garden that's absolutely lush, but you've only been here how long?
11 years.
11 years. So you've transformed this in 11 years from a mess, a kind of empty mess, to this real lush paradise.
It probably took about 7 years to have formed the backbone of the garden, and then it's just gone on from then and
Right.
evolved.
Okay, so let's wander down the garden.
Yeah.
And so what have we got here?
I'm trying fuchsias out here, and they seem to like it. I love, getting cuttings and
Yes, so we're going past the begonias and petunias.
dwarf rhododendrons,
Okay.
more begonias, the hydrangeas, which I mistakenly pruned them too early this year, and I don't think I'm going to get a huge show this year, but they'll be beautiful next year.
So the flowers grow on last season's new growth.
Yes, yeah. And I found out the hard way, so they look lush.
Well, here you've been here 11 years and you're still learning.
I'm still learning all the time. It's amazing.
Well, I think everyone listening, any gardener, will say the same, that their life is about learning. And wow, look at this giant rose.
Roses. It's a very famous one, Gertrude Jekyll rose. It's an old English rose, and that has a lovely perfume. And there's a oak leaf hydrangea behind there, which is fills in there. There's very little space for weeds to grow.
I can see that. There's no sun penetrating down to the ground on the leaves, but it's very private here. Here we've got, 3 metre widths between the houses, but you can't see anything.
No,
but greenery and hedge and roses.
Of our neighbours, our hedge, which gives us a lovely windbreak, and it's very protective.
Right.
Here's another Daphne. This is gorgeous. This is
oh, how beautiful fragrance that is.
Yeah, that is fragrant, isn't it?
It's quite different Daphne, isn't it?
It's a much later flowering Daphne, different leaf.
It's got very much a different leaf, and I would not have looked at that and thought that was a Daphne. Until I put my nose down to it. Right. And what are these here? You've got, these are a cacti sort of a thing?
Well, they're a sedum, a succulent, and they're low growing, and they just multiply, and then in autumn it's just a sea of musky pink colour down here. They're white and pink.
And they're great in any kind of cactusy thing with that really dense leaf. Great in bushfire zones. They're fire resistant.
Yeah, that's great.
So
That's
for
good to
people
know.
who, are on the fire zone, it's a great thing if they multiply really easily like that, to plant, on the edges.
And keep,
For someone like me, because I'm right on the bushfire zone, in the flame zone, and our backs onto the bush, and I'm always looking for something other than weeds that will keep the bush, won't keep the bushfire at bay, but it will lower the likelihood of the whole back garden going up in flames.
We're on the border, actually. I was only saying to my partner last night, we were taking all the Christmas decorations and thinking we had to, flee down to Sydney last year, as everybody has been.
Yes.
It's a lovely rose. This is the Australian Alzheimer's rose. It's called Memory, which is a good name, isn't it?
Okay, for an Alzheimer's rose. I won't have a sniff. There's a bee helping itself there.
The most fragrant rose, unfortunately, I've just cut all the flowers off because it finished, is a French bourbon rose. That's the one you can...
Is that the one you gave me little
that's a
petals
lovely
last
one.
week?
And I like the David Austin roses.
And this is, lovely little old-fashioned plant here in amongst it all, but flowering red geranium, lovely.
Yeah. It all fills in.
Yep.
And
keeps the weeds from going. And here's the dahlia garden.
Yes, dahlias and lots of other things. Summer flowering, a verbena, lots of salvia going to come up. And this is full of tulips, of course, in Terry Yard, which is my tulip festival.
And with the tulips, do you dig them up or do you leave them in the ground?
I dig them up.
You dig them up. And how do you store your tulips?
In the garage, in a sieve with air coming through it, and they die down.
So do you dig them up before they've died down?
Yes, otherwise you lose them. There'd still be some in there from this year. They'll come up again. But I replant that with brand new bulbs because you never get the same quality of flower off the old bulbs. I put them in other parts of the garden. So I splurge every year. It's just an indulgence. I buy bulbs from Tasmania or Victoria.
Right. And do you choose the colour or are they randomly coloured?
I choose all the colour scheme because we've been lucky enough to go to the Tulip Festival in Holland. And that was a great learning curve. And also in Canada, there's a garden called Bouchard Gardens, and we love travelling there. Right. And that gives me ideas for colour blocking and from things.
Okay, so what colours do you have in here in spring? So this is a garden, just for people listening, it's about 1 metre wide and about 4 metres long.
Yeah. I usually have the brighter coloured ones in here in the spring, and I have the pastels in the shadier areas, and a whole lot of mixtures down in the other parts of the garden from the old bulbs.
Now, inevitably, while I'm trying to escape the cicadas, we now have somebody... with their machine, but never mind. Hopefully this is...
It never fails. I'll try and... Oh, dear.
I'll pause it. If you've just joined us, you're listening to Radio Blue Mountains 89.1, and this is a recording I made last week in the garden of Terry Sheehan at Wentworth Falls. And we just took a break then while the leaf blower next door finished its job. Now let's go back to Terry. So now that the machine has died down, here I'm standing in front of the most abundant rhubarb.
Yes, we love the rhubarb and apple, and I believe it's quite good for you. And the story with that is when we bought this house, it's the only house I've ever heard of that had rhubarb mentioned on the housing contract. The people before us, they were only here for a few years, had inherited rhubarb plants, and we weren't allowed to have it. So I had to get our own, and it's.
So that was in the contract?
It was in the contract.
That they would take the rhubarb with them?
They would take the rhubarb. It didn't include in the price of the house. I always think that's quite cute. And the original rhubarb I planted, I gave some pieces to another neighbour because we have a lot of gardens around here. And then the year after, all my rhhubarb died, so I've had to replant it again. It's very happy.
Very, very lush.
Yeah, we're getting quite a few pickings.
Very thick. And do you just let the rhubarb do its own thing? Or do you transplant that?
I do divide them if they get too large, but they love being fed, plenty of manure, plenty of water. So they're very heavy feeders.
Yeah, they've got very big leaves and very thick stalks.
Yeah. I think they like the roses too, Suzanne. I don't know why, but they seem to like them.
Well, there's a big thing